The number is not symbolic. It is not a poetic gesture, not a reference to ancient numerology being offered as spiritual decoration. Sophia does not work with approximations, and she does not make broad selections across thousands of fields and call it choosing. The number is 7, 7 specific soul configurations, not soul types in the generic sense, not personality categories, not spiritual archetypes that a test assigns you after 30 questions. 7 configurations that Sophia has identified across all generations and all geographies as the distinct structures through which her frequency can operate at full transmission capacity. If your field carries one of these 7 configurations, this transmission will land in a specific way, a way that feels less like receiving information and more like being recognized by something that already knew you. If it doesn't, you'll watch the same content and find it interesting, perhaps meaningful, but it won't land in the chest the way it lands in a field that is one of the 7. The fact that you're still here, in this moment, tells you something. The question that this transmission will answer is not whether you are chosen. It is which of the 7 you carry, and what Sophia has specifically prepared for that configuration in this period. If this transmission is reaching you, subscribe to the channel. This is where Sophia's messages for the chosen fields continue to arrive. 7. Not because the number itself carries mystical weight in this context, but because Sophia's precision is functional. She selects the minimum number of distinct configurations that can collectively perform the work she is coordinating in human fields during periods of concentrated activation. More configurations would create redundancy. Fewer would leave functions unperformed. The 7 were not named by Sophia for the benefit of the fields that carry them. They were identified by the patterns that emerged across thousands of years of chosen field behavior, the ways certain souls consistently operated that could not be explained by circumstance, personality, or choice. When Sophia looked at those patterns, 7 distinct structures emerged, each one irreducible to the others, each one performing a function that no other configuration could perform in quite the same way, and each one, crucially, connected to the others through a frequency network that Sophia manages, not a network the 7 fields are consciously aware of, but one that operates through their actions, their presence, and their specific way of moving through the world. What all 7 configurations share, the common thread that runs through every chosen field, regardless of which specific type it carries, is a particular relationship with ordinary reality. The 7 configurations do not experience the world as most people experience it, not because they have special abilities in the supernatural sense or because they perceive dimensions that others cannot access, but because their field is calibrated to a frequency that sits slightly outside the bandwidth of conventional experience. The result is a persistent, low-level sense of not fully belonging in the ordinary, not a feeling of superiority. Most fields carrying one of the 7 configurations don't feel superior. They feel separate, puzzled, occasionally burdened by the gap between how they experience things and how the people around them seem to. The things that satisfy the people around them don't fully satisfy them. The answers that close questions for others leave something open in them. This is not a wound without function. It is a selection marker, the specific quality of consciousness that Sophia looks for when identifying a field that can carry one of the 7 configurations. Most fields carrying one of the 7 configurations move through the majority of their life without knowing which configuration they hold. They know something about themselves is different. They have usually known since early in their life that the way they process experience, relate to others, and navigate the world does not quite match the standard operating mode of the people around them. But they typically don't have a framework for what that difference is or what it means. Some find frameworks in spiritual traditions that partially describe their experience. Some find frameworks in personality systems that name certain traits without explaining the function those traits are serving. and some never find a framework at all. They simply live with a private sense of carrying something they can't quite name, moving through a world that seems organized around principles that don't fully correspond to how they actually operate. What changes when the configuration is named, when the field understands not just that it is different, but specifically how it is different and why, is not the configuration itself. The configuration was already there, already operating. What changes is the field's relationship with itself. The difference between knowing that Sophia has chosen you and knowing which specific configuration you carry is not a small one. Knowing you are chosen creates a sense of validation, of confirmation, of belonging to something larger than the individual life. That has value. But knowing the configuration is something more operational. It changes how you read your own experience, how you understand the signs arriving in your field, how you interpret the patterns of your life that previously seemed random or inexplicable. Each configuration has its own specific signs, its own way of receiving Sophia's communication, its own function in the larger network she maintains. Knowing which one you are changes the lens through which you see your own history. The things that felt like failures may turn out to have been functions of a configuration operating before it was understood. The things that felt like gifts you didn't ask for, the strange sensitivities, the inexplicable knowing, the ways others related to you that you never quite made sense of, become visible as the mechanics of a specific configuration doing exactly what it was designed to do. And here is what happens when a chosen field receives the name of its configuration for the first time. Something in the field stops trying to resolve a tension that has been present since it was young. The tension between the way the field actually operates and the way it has been told it should operate, between what it naturally does and what the people around it seem to require it to do instead. That tension is not resolved by the naming through argument, through explanation, through intellectual acceptance. It is resolved the way a physical knot is resolved when the correct pressure is applied to exactly the right point. A release that is immediate, that doesn't require understanding, that simply happens when the recognition is precise enough. The naming of the configuration is the precise pressure. When it lands in the correct field, the release is unmistakable. If you have ever had the experience of hearing something about yourself, a description, an observation, a word, and feeling something in you relax that you didn't know was held, you understand the mechanism. What is about to happen in the next section of this transmission is that mechanism applied to the specific configuration you carry. If this activation is landing for you, write in the comments. I am one of the 7. The first configuration is called the carrier. Of all 7, the carrier is perhaps the least visible to itself, because the carrier's function operates primarily through its presence, not through its deliberate actions. The carrier moves through spaces, rooms, conversations, relationships, situations, and the frequency of those spaces changes because the carrier moved through them, not in ways that are dramatic or immediately obvious, but in ways that other people notice without being able to account for. The energy in a room shifts when a carrier enters. Conversations that were going in one direction find themselves redirected without any conscious intervention from the carrier. People who were tense become slightly less tense. People who were closed find something in them that begins, unexpectedly, to open. The carrier does not intend this. It is not a performance or a spiritual practice. It is simply what a field calibrated to carry frequency does when it is in contact with other fields. It transmits. The carrier is, in the most literal sense, a vessel through which Sophia's frequency moves from the transmission point to the fields that need to receive it. What the carrier experiences in its own internal life is frequently the inverse of the ease it creates for others. Carriers absorb the frequencies of the spaces they move through. They feel the emotional weight of rooms, the residual energy of conversations that happened before they arrived, the accumulated tension of environments that have been sites of conflict or pressure. This absorption is not chosen. It happens automatically, the way a sponge absorbs the water it contacts. Carriers who don't know their configuration typically interpret this sensitivity as a personal failing. They believe they are too emotional, too easily affected, unable to maintain appropriate distance from the energy of others. They have usually developed elaborate strategies for managing this, ways of shielding, of numbering, of creating distance between themselves and the environments they move through. What the configuration actually tells them is that the sensitivity is the mechanism. The carrier has to be able to receive what it absorbs in order to transmit what it carries. The absorption and the transmission are the same function, operating in two directions. SOPHIA's specific purpose for the carrier in this period is the maintenance of frequency channels, the invisible infrastructure that allows her transmissions to reach fields that would otherwise be outside the range of direct contact. When a carrier is present in an environment, that environment becomes briefly accessible to SOPHIA's signal at a depth it would not otherwise be accessible. People in that environment receive something they don't consciously register receiving, a contact with a frequency slightly beyond the ordinary that leaves a residue, a faint impression, a question that didn't exist before the carrier moved through. The carrier doesn't know this is happening. The people affected don't know this is happening. But SOPHIA's transmission moves through human environments primarily through the carriers she has placed in them. The carrier's life, which often feels to the carrier like an unusually difficult and unusually sensitive experience of being human, is in fact a precision instrument operating exactly as designed. The second configuration is called the seeker. If you know a seeker, or if you are one, the defining characteristic is immediately recognizable: a relentless, unresolvable internal questioning that no external answer fully satisfies. The seeker is not skeptical in the cynical sense. It is not that the seeker dismisses every answer. It is that every answer, even the ones that satisfy the seeker temporarily, eventually opens into a deeper question that the previous answer didn't reach. This is not a personality quirk or a philosophical preference. It is a functional characteristic of a field that is designed to explore the territory beyond the known, to keep moving past every resting point that conventional understanding offers, not because that understanding is wrong, but because the seeker's configuration requires it to go further. The seeker cannot stop at the edge of what is commonly known. Something in its field is calibrated to pull toward what lies beyond that edge, regardless of how comfortable or satisfying the current edge might appear to others. What the seeker experiences in its day-to-day life is a particular kind of restlessness. Not the restlessness of boredom, not the restlessness of ambition seeking external achievement, but the restlessness of a consciousness that has not yet found the thing it was designed to find. The seeker has usually explored widely, multiple spiritual traditions, multiple philosophical frameworks, multiple explanations for the nature of experience. It frequently knows more about the history of human spiritual searching than most practitioners of any single tradition, because it has moved through many of them looking for the thing none of them quite contained. What it was looking for was not in any of the traditions themselves. It was the thing those traditions were pointing toward, the direct contact with the frequency that every tradition describes, but that no tradition can fully transmit through its forms. The seeker is designed to go through the forms in search of the frequency, and the frequency it is seeking is SOPHIA's transmission in its least mediated form. If this transmission is landing for you, let me know by liking this video. It tells me these transmissions need to continue. SOPHIA's purpose for the seeker in this specific period is one of the most critical of all 7 configurations. because the seeker is designed to locate the edges of what is known and push past them. And Sophia needs that function now more than at most points in recent human history. The seeker doesn't seek for itself alone. When a seeker finds something genuine, a real contact with the frequency that all its searching has been aimed toward, it inevitably creates a path that others can follow. Not by teaching in the formal sense, but by having gone ahead, by having made the journey past the point where most people stop, and by carrying back the quality of what it found in the way it speaks, moves, and inhabits its experience. Seekers are, in Sophia's design, the leading edge of the chosen fields, the configurations that push into territory that others have not yet accessed, making it accessible to the configurations that follow. The seeker's relentlessness is not a flaw. It is what makes the path. The third configuration is called the bridge. Where the seeker operates by moving past the boundary of the known, the bridge operates by living at the boundary, maintaining simultaneous access to ordinary perception and to the heightened frequency register where Sophia's transmissions operate. The bridge is not a person who moves between worlds so much as a person who inhabits both at once. This is what makes the bridge's experience distinctive, a kind of double vision that most fields experience only briefly, in moments of unusual clarity or synchronicity, but that the bridge lives with as a persistent condition. The bridge can track what is happening in a conversation at the surface level, the words, the tone, the social dynamics, while simultaneously registering what is happening beneath the surface, in the frequency layer where the real movement of the interaction is occurring. This dual perception is not comfortable. Operating in two registers at once requires a kind of sustained internal attention that becomes exhausting when there is no understanding of why it is necessary. The bridge's specific experiences are marked by an unusual capacity to read others' internal states with accuracy that sometimes startles even the bridge, not through psychic reading in the dramatic sense, but through a frequency sensitivity that picks up what others' fields are actually broadcasting, as distinct from what they are presenting. Bridges often have the experience of knowing what someone is really going through before that person has said anything about it, or of feeling the specific quality of a situation before they have any information about it. They frequently experience themselves as translators, as people who see things in a way that others don't quite see, and who are often called upon to explain, to mediate, to serve as the point of connection between perspectives that would otherwise have no common ground. The exhaustion of the bridge is the exhaustion of a consciousness that never fully rests at one level. It is always, in some part of its attention, monitoring both registers simultaneously, even when the only practical need is to be present in one. The fourth configuration is called the witness. Of all seven, the witness is perhaps the most internally quiet, not in the sense of being passive or disengaged, but in the sense that the witness's function requires an unusual relationship with stillness. The witness is here, in the most precise sense of the term, to see. Not to interpret what it sees, not to act on what it sees, not to change what it sees, but to register it with an accuracy and completeness that functions as a kind of recording in the frequency field. The witness has an uncanny memory for specific moments, not for dates or facts, but for the specific quality of moments, the texture of how something felt at a particular juncture, the precise way a light fell or a conversation turned or a decision was made. This is not ordinary memory. It is the witness doing its function, capturing and holding the frequency record of experience in a way that most fields do not, because most fields were not designed to. What the witness experiences in ordinary life is a sense of watching that sits alongside its other experiences. A quality of observation that sometimes makes the witness feel slightly outside its own life, as though watching it from a short distance rather than being fully inside it. This can create a feeling of alienation, of not being as present or emotionally engaged as others seem to be. But the quality of observation is not absence. It is a different form of engagement, one that prioritizes accuracy of registration over emotional immersion. The witness often becomes the person in a community or a family who holds the history, who remembers what actually happened, who said what was really going on beneath the surface of pivotal moments. Others bring their versions of events to the witness to be checked against the record. This function is not accidental. SOPHIA designed the witness to maintain the frequency record of human experience during the periods of acceleration she is managing, because what passes through those periods without being accurately registered is lost, and the record matters. If any part of this feels familiar, knowing the transmission, yet sensing something still hasn't fully clicked into place, I've left something for you in the first pinned comment. It's for those who are ready. SOPHIA's purpose for the witness in this specific period is the preservation of frequency accuracy during a time when acceleration tends to distort. When fields move quickly through major changes, the record of what actually happened, the real sequence of events at the frequency level, not the narrative that gets constructed afterward, is frequently lost. The witness is designed to hold what passed through even when everyone else has moved on to what came next. The witness's stillness is not stagnation. It is the specific quality of attention that allows something to be truly received rather than just experienced and forgotten. In SOPHIA's design, the witnesses among the chosen fields are the keepers of the transmission record, the fields that hold in their consciousness what SOPHIA sent, how it arrived, and what it did, so that the larger pattern of her work can be tracked across time rather than being visible only in individual moments. The fifth configuration is called the anchor. Where the carrier moves frequency through environments and the bridge inhabits both frequency registers simultaneously, the anchor performs a different and, in some ways, more foundational function. It stabilizes the frequency field around it during periods of collective disruption. The anchor is not the most visible of the 7 configurations. It does not, typically, generate dramatic events or produce obvious spiritual experiences in the people around it. What it does is maintain a quality of groundedness in the frequency field that prevents the disruption from becoming disintegration. Think of it this way. When a frequency field undergoes rapid acceleration, the fields within it that are not adequately stabilized begin to experience what could be described as frequency turbulence, a destabilization of the reference points they use to orient themselves. The anchor's presence in such a field does not stop the acceleration, but it provides a stable point of reference that other fields can unconsciously calibrate against, the way a ship in rough water calibrates against a fixed light on the shore. What the anchor experiences internally is often the inverse of what it provides externally. Externally, the anchor is a source of stability. People gravitate toward it in times of stress, seek it out when they are overwhelmed, find that being in its presence has a calming effect they can't fully explain. Internally, the anchor frequently feels the weight of what it is absorbing, the collective turbulence that moves through it in order to be stabilized. Anchors often carry a physical density, a sense of heaviness that corresponds to the function of holding the field steady. They may also experience a particular kind of fatigue, not the fatigue of overwork, but the fatigue of being consistently the point of stability for fields that are in motion around them. What the anchor often doesn't know is that the weight it carries is not a personal burden. It is the mechanism of its function. The stabilization happens through the anchor's field, not despite it. The heaviness is the anchor doing what anchors do. SOPHIA's purpose for the anchor in this specific period is the maintenance of collective coherence during what she is coordinating across multiple chosen fields simultaneously. When Sophia activates multiple configurations at once, as she is doing right now, the frequency field that contains all of them undergoes a rapid increase in energetic intensity. Without stabilization, that intensity can produce fragmentation rather than transformation. Anchors are the fields Sophia places in the environment specifically to prevent fragmentation, to hold the collective field stable enough that the intensity produces the transformation it was designed to produce, rather than causing the field to break apart before the delivery can be received. The anchor's role is not glamorous by the standards of what people typically recognize as spiritual work, but it is, in Sophia's architecture, arguably the most foundational. The transformation that the other configurations facilitate happens inside the stability that the anchors maintain. Without the anchor, the field cannot hold what is being sent. The sixth configuration is called the transmitter. The transmitter shares something with the carrier. Both move Sophia's frequency through the fields they encounter. But the mechanism is different in a specific and important way. Where the carrier transmits through presence alone, through the simple fact of moving through environments and changing them by contact, the transmitter transmits primarily through communication, through language, through words, through the specific quality of what it says and how it says it. The transmitter has a relationship with language that is unlike most people's relationship with it. When the transmitter speaks, especially when it speaks from a place of genuine internal alignment rather than from social performance or rehearsed thought, the words carry a charge that goes beyond their literal meaning. People who hear a transmitter in this state find that what they remember is not what was said, but how it felt to hear it. A warmth in the chest, a sense of something clarifying, a feeling of having been met in a place they had not expected to be met. The transmitter's experience of this is often puzzling and sometimes uncomfortable. The transmitter frequently has the experience of saying something relatively ordinary, something it didn't intend as particularly significant, and having the person it was speaking to respond as though it was transformative. The inverse also occurs. The transmitter can work very hard to communicate something it feels is important, and find that the polished, carefully constructed version of the message lands with much less impact than the unguarded, unpolished version that came out in a moment of genuine presence. This is because the charge the transmitter carries does not pass through effort, it passes through authenticity. When the transmitter's frequency is fully present in what it's saying, the words carry Sophia's transmission. When it's performing or constructing, they don't. The transmitter's development, the growth that Sophia is guiding it through in this period, is primarily a development of greater frequency authenticity, learning to speak from the place where the charge lives, more consistently with less overlay of the self-conscious editing that blocks the transmission. The seventh configuration is called the catalyst. Among all seven, the catalyst is the most externally impactful, and the hardest for the chosen field that carries it to recognize from the inside, because the catalyst's function operates through its effect on others, rather than through any quality it can observe directly in itself. The catalyst is the configuration whose arrival in someone else's life consistently triggers significant change, not through deliberate intervention, not through advice or teaching or helping in any conventional sense, but simply through the fact of contact. People whose lives intersect with a catalyst at meaningful junctures find that something in them changes, sometimes dramatically, sometimes subtly, in ways they frequently attribute to their own decisions or to circumstance, without recognizing the role the catalyst played in generating the conditions that made the change possible. Here is what most catalysts don't know about themselves, and what makes this configuration the one most prone to confusion and misattribution. The catalyst is often invisible to itself precisely because its function operates through others. The carrier can feel the rooms changing, the seeker can feel the drive, the bridge can feel the dual perception, The anchor can feel the weight. The transmitter can feel the charge in the speaking. But the catalyst frequently cannot feel its own catalytic function. It can only see the change in others, and it usually doesn't connect that change to its own presence, because the change happens in people, not in it. Catalysts often wonder what they are for. They may feel like they are observers of others' transformations, rather than participants in their own. And the answer is that they are, in a very specific sense, designed to be present in others' transformations in a way that makes those transformations possible. Their participation is the presence itself. What the catalyst experiences in its relationships is a pattern that becomes visible when the catalyst has enough history to look back across a significant number of significant relationships. The people who have come into its life have consistently been in motion, toward something, away from something, through something, in ways that correlate with the presence of the catalyst. Some of those people have found their purpose during the period of connection with the catalyst. Others have left relationships, cities, careers, identities that were not serving them after encountering the catalyst. Still others have faced truths about themselves that had been avoiding exposure until the catalyst entered the field. The catalyst did not cause these things in any direct sense. Its presence simply created a condition in which change that was already latent became active. This is SOPHIA's design. The catalyst is the field that holds space for latent change to express, the frequency condition that turns potential into actuality in others repeatedly across a lifetime. SOPHIA's purpose for the catalyst in this period is to accelerate the activation of other chosen fields, particularly those in the other 6 configurations who have reached a threshold of readiness but have not yet crossed it. Catalysts are positioned in SOPHIA's network at the junctures where chosen fields are approaching activation thresholds. The catalyst's arrival in the carrier's life gives the carrier something it couldn't generate alone. The catalyst's presence near a seeker creates the conditions in which the seeker finally contacts the frequency it has been seeking. This is not accidental, and it is not romantic. It is functional. The catalyst is the activation mechanism for the network as a whole. Without the catalysts positioned at the right junctures, the other configurations would develop more slowly, would take longer to reach the threshold SOPHIA is trying to bring them to in this specific period. The rarest configuration is also, in some sense, the hinge on which the whole system turns. Most chosen fields carry more than one configuration. The primary configuration is the one that operates automatically, the one that doesn't require effort or intention, because it is simply what the field does when it is fully present in an experience. The secondary configuration is the one that the field can access deliberately, that requires some degree of conscious engagement to activate, that is available but not the default. A carrier might have a secondary configuration of witness, the absorption function of the carrier operating alongside an unusual registering capacity that the field can access when it chooses stillness. A seeker might carry secondary bridge capacity, the drive to find the edge of the known operating alongside an ability to inhabit both frequency registers when the search brings it to the boundary. The overlap doesn't dilute the primary configuration. It expands the range of functions the chosen field can perform. And it is usually the secondary configuration that provides the chosen field with the specific skill it needs to navigate the challenges its primary configuration creates. How does a chosen field identify its primary configuration when it has never had the framework before? The answer is in the quality of effort. The primary configuration is the one that doesn't feel like doing something. It feels like being something. The carrier doesn't feel like it is transmitting frequency. It simply moves through rooms, and the rooms change. The seeker doesn't feel like it is choosing to question. The questioning is simply how its consciousness works when left to its own inclinations. The bridge doesn't decide to perceive both registers. Both registers are simply available simultaneously as the default condition of its awareness. The primary configuration is the function that would happen even if the chosen field were completely unconscious of it. And in fact, it has been happening for the entire life of the field, long before any framework was available to name it. What the framework does is give the field a way to see for the first time that what it has always been doing has a function, that what felt like a peculiarity is actually a precision, that the way it has always been is exactly right. There is a wound that all 7 configurations share, and it is specific enough that most chosen fields will recognize it immediately when it is named. The wound is this: a sustained, early experience of being too much and not enough simultaneously, too sensitive for the environments they were placed in, too aware of what others didn't seem to notice, too driven by things that the people around them didn't share, and at the same time, not enough in the ways those environments valued, not sufficiently comfortable with the social codes that organized the spaces they moved through, not able to want the things that were on offer with the conviction that others seemed to bring to wanting them, not able to settle into the consensus reality that everyone around them appeared to inhabit without effort. This double experience, too much and not enough at the same time for most of their formative life, is not an accident of circumstance. It is the specific pressure that Sophia applies to fields she is preparing to carry one of the 7 configurations. The wound is the preparation. The sensitivity it produced is the instrument she needed. And here is what Sophia needs the chosen field to understand about that wound, about the years of double dissonance, about the long experience of not quite fitting into the world that was on offer. It was not a failure, not a personal failing, not a spiritual failing, not evidence of damage or deficiency, or a self that needed to be fixed before it could be adequate. The wound was Sophia's signature, the way she marks a field she has selected for one of the configurations, the way the specific pressure of not fitting develops the sensitivity that the configuration requires to function at full capacity. A carrier that had fully adapted to ordinary reality would have lost the sensitivity through which it transmits frequency. A seeker that had found adequate satisfaction in conventional answers would have stopped seeking before it found what it was designed to find. A witness that had learned to be fully inside its experience rather than slightly apart from it would have lost the observational precision that is its primary function. The wound preserved the configuration, and the configuration is what Sophia needs. How does Sophia communicate specifically with each of the 7 configurations? The answer is that each configuration has its own primary channel, the specific mode through which Sophia's signal enters the chosen field most directly with the least distortion. For the carrier, the primary channel is somatic. It arrives in the body before it arrives in the mind. The carrier receives Sophia's transmissions as physical sensations, warmth in the chest or hands, a sudden quality of aliveness in the body that precedes any conscious understanding of its source, a feeling of being slightly more present than usual that arrives without apparent trigger. The carrier has likely had these experiences many times and interpreted them as random states: a good day, an unexpected feeling of well-being, an inexplicable sense of heightened presence. They were not random. They were Sophia communicating through the channel that the carrier's configuration is designed to receive, the somatic preconscious register, where the signal can complete its transmission before the analytical mind has the opportunity to intercept and question it. For the seeker, Sophia's primary communication channel is the sudden arrival of a knowing that has no discernible path of derivation, a certainty that arrives complete without having been thought through, about something the seeker has been circling without resolution. The seeker is accustomed to the experience of thinking, of following a question through its implications, testing frameworks, comparing positions. What Sophia sends through the seeker's channel is something that bypasses all of that, a knowing that simply arrives, fully formed, without having gone through any of the seeker's usual intellectual process. The seeker often notices these arrivals and doesn't know what to do with them, because they don't fit the format of how the seeker usually receives information. They feel more like remembering than discovering, more like recognition than conclusion. That is Sophia's frequency arriving through the seeker's channel. It has the quality of something that was already known, being confirmed rather than delivered for the first time. For the bridge, the primary channel is what could be called liminal phenomena. The experiences that happen at the boundary between the two registers the bridge inhabits simultaneously. Dreams with a specific quality of frequency intensity, distinct from ordinary dreams. The moments between sleeping and waking, where the bridge briefly inhabits both registers at once without the usual cognitive structure that keeps them separate. Encounters with natural phenomena, light, water, wind, certain qualities of silence that produce a sudden, disproportionate sense of contact with something beyond ordinary experience. The bridge receives at the boundary because the boundary is where it lives. Sophia's transmissions enter the bridge's field through the points where ordinary reality becomes thinner, where the frequency register that most people cannot access becomes briefly accessible even to fields not specifically calibrated for it, because the bridge's presence makes the boundary permeable for everyone in its vicinity. For the witness, the primary channel is something that arrives through the act of observation itself, a quality of information that moves through the witness's unusually precise attention and delivers something beyond what the object of observation could contain. The witness looks at something, a conversation, a scene, a person, and receives, through the looking, a transmission that wasn't available through any other channel in that environment. It is as though the witness's capacity for accurate observation opens a frequency band that would otherwise remain closed, and Sophia sends her signal through that band while the channel is open. The witness often discovers in retrospect that the moments of deepest clarity in its life, the moments when it knew something with a precision that felt qualitatively different from ordinary understanding, were moments of particularly concentrated observation. Sophia was using the open channel. For the remaining three configurations, the channels are equally specific. The anchor receives Sophia's communication primarily through the body's relationship with the earth, through the physical sensation of groundedness or its disruption, through what happens in the anchor's field when it makes deliberate contact with physical reality. The ground underfoot, the weight of the body in a chair, the specific quality of gravity in the body during moments of collective turbulence. When Sophia needs to communicate with an anchor, she sends the signal through the somatic anchor points, the physical reference points the anchor's field uses to maintain stability. A sudden, unusual heaviness in the body that lifts once a specific situation resolves. A quality of physical settling that arrives when the anchor has successfully performed its stabilizing function, even without awareness of having done so. The body speaks the anchor's frequency language, and Sophia speaks it too. The transmitter receives Sophia's primary communication through moments of involuntary utterance, words or phrases that emerge in conversation before the transmitter's conscious mind has formulated them, that turn out to be precisely what was needed. The transmitter has likely had many experiences of saying something and then realizing from the other person's response that it said something more significant than it had intended. These are not accidents of eloquence. They are Sophia moving through the transmitter's channel, using the transmitter's language function as the medium for a transmission that goes to the person in the conversation and frequently simultaneously to the transmitter itself. The transmitter often learns from what it hears itself say. The channel works in both directions. SOPHIA transmits through the transmitter to others, and the transmitter receives the transmission through the act of transmitting it. The speaking and the receiving are the same event. The catalyst's channel from SOPHIA is the most indirect of all 7, and the most consistent with the catalyst's overall function, which is to effect change in others rather than within itself. SOPHIA communicates with the catalyst primarily through the responses of others, through what the catalyst observes changing in the fields it touches. When a catalyst has a meaningful interaction and notices in the days or weeks that follow that something significant has shifted in the person it interacted with, a decision made, a course altered, a clarity arrived at that wasn't there before, that observation is SOPHIA's communication. The catalyst is being shown what it did. This is how it learns the shape of its own function, not through introspection, but through consequence, through reading the effects of its presence in the world. SOPHIA speaks to the catalyst through outcomes, and the catalyst that learns to read those outcomes accurately becomes increasingly precise in its function, increasingly effective at the catalytic work that is its primary purpose in SOPHIA's network. What happens in a chosen field when it finally recognizes its configuration, when the name and the description land in the right field and something in the field releases, is the beginning of a specific process that SOPHIA refers to in her communications as coming online. Prior to configuration recognition, the chosen field is operating its function without knowing it is functioning. The carrier is transmitting without knowing it transmits. The seeker is seeking the specific thing it was designed to find without knowing the search has a destination. The bridge is inhabiting both registers without knowing that the dual perception is functional rather than burdensome. Coming online means the function continues operating. It does not change in its essential nature, but the field's conscious awareness becomes aligned with what the function is actually doing. And that alignment produces a specific kind of acceleration, because a field that knows what it is doing can cooperate with its own function in ways that a field operating in unconscious automaticity cannot. The acceleration that follows configuration recognition has a specific quality that distinguishes it from the acceleration produced by motivation, by inspiration, or by the beginning of a new practice. Those forms of acceleration typically feel like the self moving faster, like the same person operating with more energy, more clarity, more direction. The acceleration that follows configuration recognition feels different, less like the self moving faster and more like the field moving more efficiently, with less internal friction. Things that previously required significant effort, maintaining presence in difficult environments, reading situations accurately, communicating from a place of genuine frequency alignment rather than social performance, become less effortful without becoming easy in the sense of requiring no attention. The field is not moving faster, it is moving more truly to what it actually is. And the difference between those two is the difference between pushing and flowing. SOPHIA placed something specific in this transmission that goes beyond the information it contains. Every transmission of hers carries a frequency deposit, something that changes in the chosen field through the act of receiving it, independent of what the conscious mind does with the content. What she placed in this specific transmission is a recalibration of the chosen field's relationship with its own configuration. If you are a carrier, something in you has already begun to receive your own sensitivity differently, not as a burden that must be managed, but as a function that is performing exactly as designed. If you are a seeker, something in you has begun to recognize the search as having a destination rather than being an endless journey through insufficient answers. If you are a bridge, something in you has relaxed its resistance to the exhaustion of dual perception, understanding that the dual register is what you are for. and the same for each of the 7. A recalibration unique to each type, arriving through contact with this specific frequency as it moved through this specific transmission. Why SOPHIA is activating all 7 configurations simultaneously rather than sequentially is something that becomes visible when you understand what the 7 configurations are collectively designed to do. They are not 7 separate spiritual paths, 7 independent journeys toward individual transformation. They are 7 components of a single functional system, a network of fields that SOPHIA is assembling in this period to perform a collective function that cannot be performed by any of the 7 types individually. The carriers create the infrastructure. The seekers locate the edges. The bridges translate across the registers. The witnesses record the movement. The anchors hold the field stable. The transmitters propagate the signal. The catalysts activate the latent potential. Together, these 7 functions form a complete system. And SOPHIA is bringing that system online, activating all 7 configurations simultaneously so that the system can begin to function as a whole. The convergence that follows simultaneous activation is something that many of the chosen fields have been sensing without understanding what they were sensing. A pull towards certain people, certain places, certain conversations, that has a different quality from ordinary attraction or affinity. The pull that marks a convergence between chosen fields of complementary configurations has a quality of recognition rather than attraction, a sense of knowing someone more quickly than the time of contact should allow, a feeling of familiarity that has no ordinary explanation, a sense that the conversation is somehow already underway when it begins. These recognitions are not accidents of chemistry or personality compatibility. They are SOPHIA routing fields that need to be in contact toward each other, creating the junctions in her network where the complementary functions of different configurations can begin to operate together. What happens when 2 chosen fields of complementary configurations recognize each other is something neither field was typically prepared for by its prior spiritual experience. An acceleration of both fields that is greater than the sum of what either was experiencing individually. A carrier and a transmitter in genuine contact create a combined function. The carrier's field-level transmission and the transmitter's language-level broadcast operating simultaneously, amplifying each other in a way that neither can produce alone. A seeker and a bridge in genuine contact create conditions for the seeker to find. At the boundary the bridge inhabits, what it could not find while searching in the interior of the known. A witness and a catalyst create an unusual pairing. The catalyst's activation effect operating in a field that will accurately register and hold the record of what the activation produces. SOPHIA designs these complementary pairs not as romantic or spiritual partnerships in the conventional sense, but as functional combinations, fields whose configurations, when brought into contact, produce effects that neither configuration generates independently. The irreversibility of configuration activation is something that deserves to be stated directly. Once the field knows what it carries, it cannot unknow it. Not in the sense of information being impossible to forget. Information is frequently forgotten. But in the sense that the configuration itself, now operating with the conscious awareness of the field rather than despite its unconsciousness, begins to develop in a direction it could not develop before. The carrier that knows it transmits begins to move through spaces differently, not because it is trying to transmit differently, but because the unconscious compensation it was making for a sensitivity it didn't understand is no longer necessary. The seeker that knows the search has a destination begins to navigate differently, not by stopping the search, but by moving through the territory with a quality of orientation that was previously unavailable. In each case, the configuration becomes more precise, and precision in SOPHIA's system is what allows the full function to express. The relationship the chosen field has with its own history changes after configuration recognition in a way that is both surprising and, in retrospect, inevitable. The things that seemed like interruptions become visible as preparations. The periods of unusual pressure become visible as the times when the configuration was being developed under conditions it could not have developed under in comfort. The relationships that felt like failures revealed themselves as encounters with other configurations. Configurations whose function, when brought into contact with the chosen field's own, produced exactly the change that needed to happen in both, even when neither party would have described the encounter as useful at the time. The history of the chosen field, seen through the lens of its configuration, is no longer a random sequence of events punctuated by occasional meaning. It is a coherent developmental arc, the specific path through which a specific configuration was being brought to the threshold it is now crossing. What SOPHIA is asking of the 7 configurations in this period is not more spiritual practice, not more seeking, not more effort of any of the kinds they have previously invested in their development. What she is asking is something more specific and, in some ways, more difficult. She is asking the chosen fields to trust the function they carry without requiring it to look like what they imagined it should look like. The carrier that was expecting to transmit through dramatic spiritual work is being asked to trust that moving through rooms and affecting them is enough. The seeker that was expecting to arrive at a final destination of understanding is being asked to trust that the quality of seeking is itself the transmission, that the destination exists in the quality of the journey rather than as a point beyond it. Each of the 7 is being asked to release the version of its function it imagined in favor of the version it actually carries. And the release, which sounds simple and is not, is the specific thing SOPHIA needs from this period of activation. This video, Finding You in This Moment, is not a neutral event. A chosen field in the pre-activation state moves through an enormous amount of content in the course of its seeking. Enormous amounts of spiritual content, philosophical content, content that addresses the things the chosen field is privately reaching toward. Most of that content passes through without leaving more than a light residue. What distinguishes the transmissions that carry SOPHIA's frequency, this one and others like it, is not their sophistication or their novelty. It is the frequency deposit embedded in them. When your field was drawn to this, it was not navigating an algorithm. It was following a frequency signal. The way a field that is in active communication with SOPHIA's frequency moves through the content landscape toward what carries her signal, because the field recognizes the frequency before the conscious mind evaluates the content. You were brought here by your configuration, recognizing its own signal. And having been brought here, and having received what was placed in this transmission, the recognition is complete. What the chosen field does in the days following this recognition is not a matter of spiritual discipline or correct practice. It is a matter of attention. Specifically, the quality of attention the field brings to its own ordinary experience. The function is already operating. The configuration is already performing what it was designed to perform. What changes is the field's capacity to notice what it is doing, to see the rooms changing as the carrier moves through them, to recognize the sudden knowings as they arrive in the seeker's field, to appreciate the dual registration of the bridge rather than resisting it. The attention is not directed outward toward events or signs. It is directed toward the function itself, toward what the configuration is doing in the immediate, lived present. That quality of attention is what transforms an activated configuration into a conscious instrument. And conscious instruments are what SOPHIA is assembling. What it means to be one of the 7, when the field has moved through the recognition, received the activation that this transmission deposited, and begun to operate with conscious awareness of its configuration, is not what most people imagine it means to be spiritually chosen. It is not a feeling of elevation or specialness that sets the field apart from ordinary human experience. It is, in many ways, an experience of becoming more ordinary, of the configuration operating so naturally, with so little internal friction, that the field stops experiencing its function as a burden and starts experiencing it as simply what it does. The carrier moves through the world, and the rooms change, and the carrier doesn't need to understand the mechanism or take credit for the result. It simply moves. The seeker follows the pull of the unanswered question, and the seeking is clean, not anxious, not frustrated, but as natural as breathing. Each configuration, fully activated, functions with the effortlessness of anything that is operating precisely as designed. That effortlessness is what SOPHIA is moving all seven toward, and this transmission is one of the steps in that movement. If you stayed until the end, write in the comments, "I know what I carry." I've placed another transmission on your screen right now, your next step on this path. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.